Jake Morrison's stomach made another angry noise as he walked through the massive doors of Kepler Station's main marketplace. The sound echoed off the metal walls, mixing with dozens of other strange noises from the alien crowd around him. He pulled his worn guitar case closer to his shoulder and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger that had been his constant companion for the past 3 days. The marketplace was like nothing he had ever seen back on Earth. The ceiling stretched up so high that he could barely see the top, and the space was filled with creatures that looked like they came from someone's wildest dreams. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, while others slithered, floated, or moved in ways that made no sense at all. Jake stopped and stared at a vendor who had 6 arms and skin that looked like rough stone. The creature was selling something that glowed purple and smelled like burnt metal. Next to him, a tall being with crystal-like skin was arguing with a snake-like alien about the price of some shiny rocks. Their voices came through small devices that turned their strange sounds into words Jake could understand. He had been traveling through space for 6 months now, playing music on different worlds and stations to earn enough money for food and passage to the next place. Most of the time, humans were welcome enough, but they were still new to this part of the galaxy. Many aliens saw them as primitive creatures who had only recently learned to travel between stars. Jake's guitar case was getting heavy, and his legs felt weak from not eating. He had spent his last credits on passage to Kepler Station, hoping to find work here. The station was supposed to be neutral territory where all species could trade safely, which meant there might be opportunities for a human musician. He walked past stalls selling foods he could not identify, weapons that hummed with energy, and devices that did things he could not even guess at. The smells were overwhelming, some pleasant like flowers, others sharp and chemical, and a few that made his eyes water. A group of the crystal-skinned aliens noticed him walking by and started making clicking sounds. His translation device told him they were laughing about something, though he could not tell what was so funny. One of them pointed at his guitar case and said something that made the others click even louder. Jake tried to ignore them and kept walking. He had learned that most aliens found humans amusing rather than threatening, which was better than being feared but still made life difficult sometimes. He needed to find someone willing to let him play music in exchange for food. But most aliens did not think much of human entertainment. Near the center of the marketplace, he found a large food stall that seemed to be doing good business. The smell coming from it made his mouth water, something like grilled meat but with spices he had never encountered before. Behind the counter stood the largest alien Jake had ever seen up close. The creature had 6 powerful arms, each one busy with different cooking tasks. His skin looked like gray stone with deep cracks running through it, and he had 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern on his broad face. He was easily twice Jake's height and probably 10 times as heavy. This was clearly one of the hegemony species that Jake had heard about, powerful aliens who controlled several star systems and were known for their strength and pride. The creature wore what looked like an apron, but it was made from some kind of metal mesh that gleamed under the marketplace lights. Jake approached the stall slowly, his guitar case bumping against his leg with each step. The alien noticed him coming, and 2 of his 4 eyes focused on the human while the other 2 continued watching his cooking. Those eyes looked Jake up and down, taking in his worn clothes, tired face, and the obvious desperation he was trying to hide. "What does the small human want?" the alien asked. His voice was deep and rumbling, like rocks falling down a mountain. The translation device made it sound almost bored. Jake swallowed hard and tried to make his voice sound confident. "I was wondering if I could play some music for you in exchange for a meal. I'm a musician, and I haven't eaten in 3 days. The alien stopped all 6 of his arms and stared at Jake. For a moment, the only sound was the sizzling of food on the cooking surfaces. Then the creature began to laugh, a sound like boulders crashing together that echoed through the nearby stalls. "Music?" the alien said, his laughter making his whole massive body shake. "From a human? Your species barely understands basic sounds, let alone real music. But please, little human, show us your primitive noise-making. This should be entertaining." Other aliens at nearby stalls began to notice the commotion. The crystal-skinned beings stopped their trading to watch, their clicking sounds growing more excited. A group of snake-like aliens slithered closer, their forked tongues tasting the air as if they could sense drama coming. Even some humans who were shopping in the marketplace began to gather, looking embarrassed. Jake recognized the type, traders and diplomats who wore clean clothes and always worried about what aliens thought of their species. They were probably afraid that Jake would make all humans look foolish. The large alien, who Jake now noticed had a name tag that said Korath in several different scripts, continued laughing as he returned to his cooking. "Go ahead, human. Play your little sounds. Maybe if you are very entertaining, I will give you some scraps." Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment, but his hunger was stronger than his pride. He carefully set down his guitar case and opened it, revealing the old acoustic guitar that had belonged to his grandfather. The instrument was scarred and worn, with dents and scratches from years of travel, but it was the most valuable thing Jake owned. The crowd of watching aliens grew larger. Some of them held up small devices that were probably recording what they expected to be a humiliating show. Jake could hear their various sounds of amusement, clicks, hisses, mechanical beeps, and other noises that the translators turned into laughter. He lifted the guitar and checked the tuning, trying to ignore the mocking sounds around him. His hands were shaking slightly from hunger and nerves, but the familiar weight of the instrument made him feel a little better. This guitar had never let him down before, and he hoped it would not start now. Korath glanced over with 2 eyes while continuing to cook with all 6 arms. "Well, human, we are waiting to hear these amazing sounds your species is so proud of." Jake took a deep breath and positioned his fingers on the guitar strings. The crowd around him had grown even larger, with aliens of all shapes and sizes gathering to watch what they clearly expected to be a disappointing performance. Some were holding recording devices, probably planning to share the footage later as entertainment. The crystal-skinned Zephyrians were making sharp clicking sounds that his translator interpreted as amused chatter. A group of the snake-like Vorthak had coiled themselves into comfortable positions to watch the show. Even some of the mechanical Axiom drones had paused their usual business activities to observe. Jake could see the other humans in the crowd looking uncomfortable. A woman in a clean diplomatic uniform was shaking her head slightly, probably wishing she could disappear. A man in trader's clothes was already turning away, not wanting to be associated with what was about to happen. Korath continued cooking, but Jake noticed that the alien's movements had slowed down. All 4 of his eyes were now focused on the human, waiting to see what kind of primitive sounds would emerge from the strange wooden instrument. Jake started with something simple, a basic melody his grandmother had taught him when he was 7 years old. The notes came out clean and clear, each one ringing through the marketplace air. It was not fancy or complex, just a gentle tune that had always made him feel better when he was sad or scared. The alien crowd remained unimpressed. A few Zephyrians made dismissive gestures with their crystalline hands. One of the Vorthak let out a long hiss that the translator rendered as, "Is that all?" Several mechanical beings beeped in what sounded like electronic laughter, but Jake was not finished. His grandmother had taught him more than just simple melodies. She had shown him how music could tell stories, how it could speak to feelings that words could not reach. He began to add complexity to the basic tune, weaving in additional notes that created harmony with the original melody. His fingers found a rhythm that seemed to match something he had been feeling since arriving at the station. The loneliness of space travel, the uncertainty of not knowing where his next meal would come from, the hope that somewhere among the stars he might find a place where he belonged. As he played, Jake began to notice something interesting. The station itself seemed to have its own rhythm, the hum of life support systems, the distant vibration of ships docking and departing, the subtle pulse of artificial gravity generators. Without really thinking about it, he started incorporating these sounds into his music. The melody began to change, becoming something that existed only in this moment, in this place. Jake's eyes were closed now, his whole attention focused on the guitar and the sounds flowing from it. He could feel the strings vibrating under his fingers, could sense the way the music bounced off the metal walls and ceiling of the marketplace. A few aliens in the crowd had stopped making noise. Jake opened his eyes briefly and saw that some of the Zephyrians were listening more carefully now, their heads tilted in a way that suggested they were analyzing what they were hearing. Their crystal skin was catching the marketplace lights differently, creating small rainbow patterns that seemed to pulse in time with his playing. Korath had stopped cooking entirely. All 6 of his massive arms hung motionless as he stared at Jake with all 4 eyes. The expression on his rocky face was harder to read now, not mocking anymore, but not yet impressed either. Just curious. Jake closed his eyes again and let the music guide him deeper. He thought about Earth, about the family he had left behind to seek adventure among the stars. He thought about the beauty of space, the way nebulae painted colors across the darkness, the way stars looked like diamonds scattered on black cloth, the way planets hung in the void like impossible jewels. The guitar seemed to respond to these thoughts, the notes becoming more complex and layered. Jake found himself playing harmonics that he had never tried before, creating sounds that seemed to echo and build on themselves. The music was becoming something larger than what any single instrument should be able to produce. Some of the background noise in the marketplace had died down. Conversations were stopping as more aliens turned their attention to the human with the strange wooden instrument. Even the translation devices seemed to be working less, as if the beings around him were finding less need for words. Jake could feel something shifting in the crowd, though he kept his eyes closed and continued playing. The music was telling a story now. Not just his story, but something bigger. It spoke of the loneliness that every creature felt when far from home, of the hope that drove beings to explore unknown places, of the connections that could form between strangers when they recognized something familiar in each other. The melody reached a point where it seemed to pause, hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Jake held the last note, letting it ring through the marketplace silence. When it finally faded, he opened his eyes to see what effect his playing had created. The crowd was larger now, but quieter. Many of the aliens were looking at him with expressions he had not seen before. Not mockery or dismissal, but something like interest. The Zephyrians had stopped their clicking entirely, and their crystal skin was pulsing with soft light patterns. A few of the Vorthak had raised their heads higher, a sign that Jake had learned meant they were paying serious attention. Korath was staring at him with all four eyes, his massive frame completely still. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, though still deep enough to rumble through the floor. "That was not what I expected from a human," the alien said slowly. "Play more. It was not a request. It was a command, but spoken with a respect that had not been there before." Jake looked around at the watching crowd and realized that something had changed. He was no longer just entertainment for bored aliens. He had their attention now, really and truly. He positioned his fingers on the strings again, feeling more confident than he had since arriving at the station. This time he would show them what human music could really do. Jake began his second piece with more confidence, his fingers moving across the strings with growing certainty. He had felt the shift in the crowd's attention, and now he understood that he had a real chance to show these aliens something they had never experienced before. This time, instead of starting with a simple melody, Jake began with the rhythm of the station itself. He listened carefully to the deep hum of the life support systems and started matching it with his lowest strings. The sound vibrated through the marketplace floor, creating a foundation that seemed to connect with the very bones of the massive structure around them. The Axiom drones were the first to notice. These mechanical beings spent their lives analyzing patterns and efficiency, and suddenly they were detecting mathematical relationships in Jake's music that should not have existed. Their electronic beeping grew more complex as they tried to process what they were hearing. Jake built on the foundation rhythm, adding layers that matched other sounds of the station. The whoosh of air through ventilation systems became a gentle counter-melody. The distant vibration of docking ships provided percussion. Even the subtle pulse of artificial gravity generators found its way into the music. But Jake was not just copying the station's sounds, he was transforming them into something beautiful. What had been background noise became a symphony of life among the stars. The music told the story of this place, of all the different beings who came here to trade, to meet, to find what they needed to survive in the vast emptiness of space. The Zephyrians began to respond first among the organic species. Their entire culture was built around crystal harmonics, and they were incredibly sensitive to mathematical relationships in sound. As Jake's music grew more complex, their crystal skin began to resonate, creating small chiming sounds that perfectly complemented what he was playing. One young Zephyrian near the front of the crowd pulled a small crystal formation from her jewelry and held it up. The crystal caught Jake's music and amplified certain frequencies, adding ethereal harmonies that made the entire piece sound like it was being played in a cathedral made of light. The Vorthak were next to join, These serpentine beings communicated partly through subsonic vibrations that most other species could not hear, but Jake's music was creating harmonic frequencies that reached down into their range. And they began to sense emotional undertones that their own species rarely achieved in their art. A large vorthak near the back of the crowd began to hum, a deep, thrumming sound that provided a baseline Jake had not even known his music needed. The vibration traveled through the floor and up through everyone's bodies, making the entire marketplace feel like the inside of a giant musical instrument. Jake opened his eyes and saw something incredible happening. What had started as a lone human playing for food was becoming a spontaneous collaboration between species that had never worked together artistically before. Each group was contributing something unique, while still following the musical structure Jake was providing. More Zephyrians began adding crystal harmonics. Their formations created cascading chimes that sounded like starlight made audible. The vorthak humming grew richer as more individuals joined, creating complex subsonic patterns that spoke of ancient oceans and deep earth. Even some of the mechanical axiom drones began contributing. They started producing precisely timed electronic tones that filled gaps in the harmony, their mathematical minds calculating the exact frequencies needed to complete the musical equations Jake was creating. Korath stood frozen behind his cooking stall, all 6 arms hanging motionless. His 4 eyes were wide with something approaching wonder. In all his years of travel across the galaxy, he had never seen anything like this. Species that barely tolerated each other in normal circumstances were creating art together. Guided by a human with a primitive wooden instrument, Jake felt the music flowing through him in ways he had never experienced before. It was as if the guitar had become a conduit for something much larger than himself. He was no longer just playing notes. He was conducting a conversation between different forms of life, helping them find common ground in the universal language of sound and rhythm. The crowd had grown much larger. Beings from the upper levels of the station were coming down to see what was causing the unusual harmonics that were vibrating through the entire structure. Diplomats, traders, and station officials of dozens of species gathered at the edges of the marketplace, drawn by the impossible sound of interspecies cooperation. Among them, Jake noticed a human woman in an official-looking uniform. She had the bearing of someone important, probably a diplomat or ambassador. Her face showed amazement rather than the embarrassment he had seen from other humans earlier. She was witnessing something that no amount of formal negotiations had ever achieved. The music reached a crescendo where all the different elements came together in perfect harmony. Zephyrian crystals chimed like bells made of light. Vorthak humming provided depths that seemed to reach into the core of the station. Mechanical tones added precision and mathematical beauty, and Jake's guitar wove through it all like a golden thread connecting everything together. Then, gradually Jake began to bring the piece toward a close. He guided the collective symphony down from its peak, letting each species' contribution fade at the perfect moment. The axiom drones stopped their precise beeping first, followed by the Zephyrian crystals returning to silence. The vorthak humming diminished to barely audible vibrations that seemed to promise continuation, rather than ending. Finally, only Jake's guitar remained, playing a simple melody that contained echoes of everything that had come before. The last note rang through the marketplace and faded into a silence that felt pregnant with possibility. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The crowd of hundreds of beings from dozens of species stood perfectly still, as if afraid that any sound might break the spell of what they had just experienced together. Then, slowly, appreciation began to emerge in ways unique to each species. Zephyrians created soft chiming with their natural crystal formations. Vorthak produced gentle subsonic purrs that spoke of deep satisfaction. Axiom drones emitted respectful electronic acknowledgments. And Korath, the massive alien who had started this all with his mocking laughter, began to walk toward Jake with all 4 eyes focused intently on the human who had just changed everything. Korath approached Jake slowly, his massive frame moving with a careful deliberation that spoke of profound respect. The alien's 4 eyes remained fixed on the human, but there was no trace of the mockery that had been there before. All 6 of his powerful arms were extended slightly from his sides, a gesture that Jake's cultural briefings had taught him meant deep honor among the hegemony species. "Human Jake Morrison," Korath said, his voice carrying a gravity that made the translation device struggle to convey the full meaning. I have heard the music of 17 different species across 4 galactic sectors. I have attended formal concerts in the crystal halls of Zephyr Prime and listened to the great chorus of the Vorthak ocean worlds. What you have done here, it should not be possible. The crowd around them had not dispersed. If anything, more beings continued to arrive as word spread through the station's communication networks. Jake could see aliens looking down from the upper levels, their various forms creating a living gallery of galactic diversity. The human diplomat, Jake had noticed before, pushed through the crowd, with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to navigating complex social situations. She was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and intelligent eyes that were currently wide with amazement. "I'm Ambassador Lisa Carter from the Human Colonial Authority," she said, extending her hand to Jake. "I came down here expecting to handle another diplomatic incident involving a human citizen. Instead, I find what appears to be the first truly successful interspecies artistic collaboration in this station's history." Jake shook her hand, still feeling somewhat dazed by what had just happened. "I was just trying to earn a meal, Ambassador. I didn't expect any of this." Korath made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, but it was warm rather than mocking. "A meal? Human Jake Morrison. You have created something that diplomats and cultural exchanges have failed to achieve in decades of trying. Your species may be new to the galaxy, but you have just proven that your contributions go far beyond your technology or military capabilities." Ambassador Carter nodded thoughtfully. "The cultural exchange programs have been struggling for years to find common ground between species. Most aliens see humans as either primitive newcomers or dangerous militarists. But this—" She gestured at the crowd of different beings who were still lingering, many of them trying to recreate elements of the music they had just participated in. A group of Zephyrians approached, led by the young female who had first contributed her crystal harmonics. Her skin was still pulsing with soft rainbow patterns, a sign of deep emotional response in her species. "Human musician," she said, her voice creating tiny chimes even through the translator. "I am Lyrian of the 7th Resonance. In our culture, we study harmonic mathematics for decades before we are permitted to contribute to group compositions. Yet somehow you guided us into harmonies we have never achieved before. How is this possible?" Jake looked down at his guitar, trying to find words for something he did not fully understand himself. "I don't know the science behind it. Listen. Music isn't really about the technical parts for humans. It's about feelings, about connections. When I heard all of you making your own sounds, I tried to find ways to help them fit together." A large Vorthak had slithered closer, his serpentine form creating graceful curves as he moved. "Among my people, musical collaboration requires precise chemical communication through pheromone release. Yet you achieved coordination through sound alone, creating emotional resonances that reached frequencies we rarely experience. This suggests your species processes harmony in ways we have not encountered before." More aliens were approaching with questions, observations, and requests. Jake realized that what had started as a desperate attempt to earn food had become something much larger. He was no longer just a hungry human in a crowded marketplace. He had become a bridge between worlds. Ambassador Carter seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. "Jake, I think we need to discuss this properly. What you've accomplished here could have major implications for human-alien relations throughout this sector." But before Jake could respond, Korath held up all 6 arms in a gesture that commanded attention from the entire crowd. "Before we talk of implications in politics," the massive alien announced, "we address the original request. Human Jake Morrison asked to play for a meal. I believe he has more than earned what he sought." The alien chef began moving with all 6 arms, working faster than Jake had thought possible. But instead of preparing a simple meal, Korath was creating something elaborate, a feast that drew ingredients from multiple stalls around the marketplace. Other vendors, apparently inspired by what they had witnessed, began contributing as well. The Zephyrian crystal growers brought crystallized fruits that chimed softly when touched. The Vorthak traders offered fermented grains that supposedly enhanced harmonic perception. Even the normally aloof Axiom Collective contributed precisely calculated nutrition supplements that would optimize human brain function for musical performance. "This is incredible," Ambassador Carter said quietly. "In 5 years of diplomatic work, I've never seen anything like this level of voluntary cooperation between species." Jake watched in amazement as a banquet appeared before him. featuring foods from across the galaxy. The smells were overwhelming, some familiar, others completely alien, but all of them making his empty stomach remind him forcefully that he had not eaten in 3 days. As he began to sample the various offerings, more aliens approached with requests and proposals. The Zephyrians wanted him to visit their crystal gardens to experiment with larger harmonic structures. The Vorthak offered to teach him their traditional vibration techniques. Several mechanical species expressed interest in studying the mathematical properties of his improvisation methods. But perhaps most significantly, the other humans at the station were looking at him, and at their own species, with new understanding. The embarrassment and worry had been replaced by something approaching pride. "You know," Ambassador Carter said as she watched Jake try a glowing purple fruit that tasted like vanilla and starlight, "I've been working for years to convince the Galactic Council that humans deserve full membership status. Our application has been stalled because too many species see us as primitive or aggressive. But what you've done here proves that humanity brings something unique to the galactic community." Jake swallowed the amazing fruit and looked around at the crowd of aliens who were still lingering, many of them attempting to recreate elements of the music they had shared. Some Zephyrians were experimenting with new crystal combinations, while several Vorthak were humming together in ways that seemed more free-form than their usual rigid compositions. "I just played some music," Jake said. Though even as he spoke the words, he realized they were not entirely true. Something extraordinary had happened here. Something that went beyond simple entertainment or even artistic expression. Korath placed one massive hand gently on Jake's shoulder. "Human Jake Morrison, you did not just play music. You showed us that the barriers between our species exist mainly in our minds. You proved that understanding does not require perfect translation or cultural education. Sometimes it requires only the willingness to listen and respond." As the celebration continued around him, Jake realized that his desperate search for a meal had led him to something far more valuable. He had found his place in the galaxy, and in doing so, he had helped show the galaxy where humanity belonged among the stars. 3 hours later, the marketplace had transformed into something resembling a galactic festival. What had begun as Jake's simple request for food had evolved into the largest spontaneous interspecies gathering in Kepler Station's history. Aliens who normally conducted business with cold efficiency were sharing meals, exchanging cultural stories and attempting collaborative music making. Jake sat at the center of it all, his guitar resting across his lap as he worked his way through the incredible feast that had appeared around him. Each dish told its own story. The crystallized Zephyrian fruits that sang softly when bitten, the Vorthak fermented grains that seemed to enhance his ability to hear harmonic overtones, and dozens of other delicacies from species he was only beginning to learn about. Korath had outdone himself, preparing traditional dishes from his own world that required all 6 arms to coordinate properly. The massive chef explained each course as Jake tried it, his earlier mockery completely replaced by genuine enthusiasm for sharing his culture with someone who had proven worthy of respect. "This is Krellic stew," Korath said, ladling a thick savory mixture into Jake's bowl. "On my homeworld, we prepare it only for celebrations of great artistic achievement. The spices are said to enhance appreciation for complex harmonies." Ambassador Carter had remained throughout the celebration, documenting everything with the thorough attention of someone who understood the historical significance of what was happening. She had already sent several reports to the Human Colonial Authority, each one more amazed than the last. "Jake," she said, sitting down beside him with her own sampling of alien foods, "I've received preliminary responses from Earth. The Colonial Council wants to discuss offering you a position as a cultural ambassador. What you've accomplished here in 3 hours has advanced human-alien relations more than 5 years of formal diplomacy." Jake paused with a spoonful of something that tasted like chocolate mixed with starlight halfway to his mouth. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to be an ambassador. I just play guitar." "That's exactly what makes you qualified," Ambassador Carter replied. "Traditional diplomacy relies on translation, cultural briefings, and careful protocol. But you've proven that some forms of communication transcend all of that. You've shown that humans can connect with alien species on a level that doesn't require perfect understanding of their cultures or languages." Around them, the celebration continued to grow. The young Zephyrian named Lyrian had organized several of her people into an experimental harmony group, using crystal formations to create music that incorporated elements from Jake's earlier performance. Their efforts were not entirely successful, but the joy in their attempts was obvious to everyone. Watching, a group of Vorthak had coiled themselves into a complex pattern that allowed them to create vibrations that resonated through the floor in rhythmic patterns. They were trying to recreate the bass foundation that Jake's music had inspired, though their version had a distinctly different character that reflected their oceanic origins. Even some of the mechanical axiom drones were participating, having apparently decided that this kind of cultural exchange was worth interrupting their usual efficiency-focused activities. They were producing calculated tone sequences that other species could use as foundations for their own musical experiments. Jake watched it all with a mixture of amazement and growing understanding. He was beginning to see what Ambassador Carter meant about the significance of what had happened. These species had coexisted on Kepler Station for years, trading and conducting business but maintaining careful distances from each other. Now they were actively trying to understand and appreciate each other's forms of artistic expression. "There's something else," Ambassador Carter said, checking a message that had just arrived on her communication device. "The Galactic Council has been monitoring the station's communication networks. Word of what happened here has already reached representatives from dozens of star systems. We're receiving requests for you to visit other worlds, other species that want to experience this kind of cultural exchange." Jake looked down at his guitar, the worn instrument that had carried him across the galaxy and led him to this moment. It had belonged to his grandfather, who had played it in small venues on Earth, never imagining that it might one day serve as a bridge between worlds. "What if I'm not able to do this again?" Jake asked. "What if today was just lucky?" Korath, who had been listening while preparing another course, made a sound like gentle thunder. "Human Jake Morrison, what happened here was not luck. You have a gift for hearing the music that exists between different forms of life. This is not something that can be taught or learned. It is something you either possess or you do not." Lyrian approached their table, her crystal skin still pulsing with the gentle rainbow patterns that indicated deep emotional response. "Human musician, my people have decided to extend an invitation. We would like you to visit our homeworld and participate in the Great Resonance, our most sacred musical ceremony. No non-Zephyrian has ever been invited before." Before Jake could respond, several Vorthak slithered over with their own proposal. "The ocean singers of our homeworld wish to learn from your harmonic techniques. We offer passage to our system and the honor of contributing to our deep current symphony." More offers followed. The Mechanical Axiom Collective wanted to study his improvisation methods. A trader mentioned that his own species, the Calarian Wanderers, had musical traditions that might complement Jake's abilities. Even some species that Jake had never heard of were sending messages through their representatives at the station. Jake felt overwhelmed by the sudden flood of opportunities, but also deeply grateful. This morning he had been a desperate, hungry human hoping for scraps. Now he was being offered chances to explore musical traditions from across the galaxy. "You don't have to decide everything right now," Ambassador Carter said, seeming to sense his confusion. "The important thing is that you've opened doors that we didn't even know existed. Whatever you choose to do next, you've already changed how humans are perceived in this part of the galaxy." As the celebration continued into the station's night cycle, Jake found himself playing again, not for food this time, but for the simple joy of sharing music with beings who had learned to appreciate what he could offer. The songs were different now, influenced by the sounds and rhythms he had discovered in collaboration with his new alien friends. The marketplace gradually quieted as different species returned to their quarters or ships, but many left promises to return, to continue the musical experiments they had begun. Jake realized that he had not just earned a meal, he had started something that would continue long after he left the station. Later, as Jake finally prepared to find lodging for the night, Korath approached with a final gift, a small crystalline device that the Zephyrians had created during the celebration. "This will record and preserve the harmonic patterns of your music," the massive alien explained, "so that even when you travel to distant worlds, the memory of what we created together will remain here on Kepler Station." Jake accepted the gift with gratitude, understanding that it represented more than just a recording device. It was proof that music could create connections that transcended the vast distances between stars, and that sometimes the most important journeys began with the simplest requests. As he walked through the now quiet marketplace toward the station's guest quarters, Jake carried with him not just a full stomach and a place to sleep, but the knowledge that he had found his purpose among the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now he had a way to experience them that honored both his human heritage and the incredible diversity of life that existed beyond Earth. His grandfather's guitar had helped him discover that home was not a place but a connection, and that connection could be found anywhere. Beings were willing to listen and respond to each other with open hearts.